What happens when a private war becomes a public spectacle? In the glittering world of Manhattan's elite tech millionaire Julian Vance had it all: a breathtaking wife, a sprawling empire, and a beautiful young mistress on the side. That mistress, an influencer named Amber Lynn, wasn't content to stay in the shadows. She waged a campaign of quiet cruelty on social media, taunting the pregnant wife Flora, convinced she was winning. But she never imagined that the woman she tried to break was a writer. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's the story of how one woman's diary of pain, penned in the darkest hours of her life, became a global bestseller, ignited a movement, and proved that the ultimate victory isn't stealing a man. It's building an empire of your own. Flora Vance believed her life was a masterpiece of curated perfection. Their Soho brownstone wasn't just a home. It was a feature in Architectural Digest, a symphony of Italian marble, reclaimed wood, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto a city that felt like theirs. Her husband, Julian Vance, wasn't just a man. He was a titan, the founder and CEO of Ethereum Dynamics, a tech behemoth that promised to revolutionize data storage. His face, with its sharp jawline and confident blue eyes, was a regular on the covers of Forbes and Wired. To the world, they were the Vances, a power couple. He the visionary, she the elegant art historian, the perfect complement to his raw ambition. Flora had put her own career on hold, a decision that felt less like a sacrifice and more like a logical step in building their shared dynasty. She managed their homes in Soho and the Hamptons, curated their formidable art collection, and hosted the kinds of dinner parties where deals worth 9 figures were sketched out on cocktail napkins. For 8 years it had been perfect. Or rather, she had meticulously polished away the imperfections until they were invisible to the naked eye. She ignored the way Julian's phone would light up with texts at 2 a.m., which he'd dismiss as the team in Singapore. She overlooked his increasingly frequent business trips that seemed to coincide with major art fairs or fashion weeks in cities she wasn't invited to. He was a busy man, a brilliant man. This was the price of admission to his world. The first crack in their gilded cage didn't appear with a bang, but with a whisper, a digital ghost. It was an Instagram account under the handle @AmberLynnLux. The woman Amber Lynn was everything Flora was not. Where Flora was refined elegance, Amber was explosive overt sensuality. Her feed was a curated carousel of high-end restaurants, exclusive beach clubs, and the interiors of private jets. At first, Flora thought nothing of it. Just another influencer chasing clout. But then the details started to emerge small and sharp as shards of glass. Amber posted a photo of her wrist adorned with a new Cartier love bracelet. It was identical to the one Julian had given Flora for their anniversary 2 years prior. The caption read, "Some things are just meant to be locked in. #blessed. A week later, a selfie. Amber, pouting seductively into the camera, was in the back of a car. Over her shoulder, just out of focus, but unmistakable to Flora, was the custom-burled walnut trim of Julian's Maybach. On my way to somewhere special. Good vibes only. The real blow came one Tuesday. Julian was supposedly in Chicago for a tech conference. Flora was arranging flowers in the vast echoing foyer when a notification pinged on her iPad. It was a post from Amber. She was standing on a balcony, a champagne flute in hand, overlooking a spectacular sunset. The background was the iconic jagged coastline of Positano. Flora's blood ran cold. She zoomed in. The wrought iron railing of the balcony, with its distinctive scrollwork, was identical to the one at Villa Treville, the boutique hotel where she and Julian had spent their honeymoon. A place he had always called our secret. Amber's caption, revisiting a place of magic, creating new memories that will last a lifetime. La dolce vita. Flora felt the air leave her lungs. It wasn't proof, not in a court of law, but in the court of a woman's intuition the verdict was in. She walked through their silent, perfect house, each object a testament to a life she now realized might be a beautifully constructed lie. The photograph on the mantelpiece they were smiling at a charity gala seemed to mock her. Julian's arm was around her, but his eyes, she now saw, were looking somewhere past the camera, already focused on his next acquisition. That night when Julian called from his conference, his voice was smooth as silk. "Miss you, Elle. The keynote went great. It's all just spreadsheets and projections, without you here to make it beautiful." Flora stood clutching the phone, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. "It sounds lovely, Julian." She managed her voice, hollow. "I saw a photo of Positano today. It made me think of our honeymoon." There was a fractional pause, a silence so brief anyone else would have missed it. But Flora had spent 8 years learning the nuances of her husband's silences. "Positano," he said, his laugh a little too quick. "God, I wish. No, darling, it's just the concrete jungle of Chicago for me. Maybe we can go back next year for our anniversary." He was lying. The ease with which he did it was more chilling than the act itself. He wasn't just cheating. He was erasing her, rewriting their shared history with this other woman. She hung up the phone and walked into their master bathroom, a cavern of white marble and chrome. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. She saw a woman who was 35, impeccably dressed and utterly, terrifyingly alone. That night, she didn't sleep in their shared bed. She wrapped herself in a cashmere throw and curled up on a chaise lounge in her walk-in closet, surrounded by designer clothes that felt like costumes for a role she was no longer sure she wanted to play. The gilded haunt had never felt more like a prison, and she was just beginning to understand that the serpent wasn't at the gate. It was already inside. In the weeks that followed, Flora discovered the unique modern torture of being the wife of a man having an affair in the age of social media. Amber Lynn wasn't just a mistress. She was a master of psychological warfare, fought on a battlefield of filtered photos and carefully crafted captions. She was winning, and she wanted the whole world, but specifically Flora, to know it. Amber never mentioned Julian by name. She didn't have to. Her strategy was far more insidious. She created a mirror image of Flora's life, a taunting, ghost-like presence that infiltrated every corner of her world. It began with restaurants. Julian would take Flora to Per Se for her birthday, a quiet, elegant dinner. 3 days later, Amber would post a photo from the exact same table, a single glass of whiskey, Julian's preferred Macallan 25, sitting opposite her empty seat. The caption, "A perfect meal with even better company. He has the best taste." At NYC, fine dining. Flora felt a creeping sense of paranoia. She started cross-referencing Julian's credit card statements, which he'd always left for their accountant on his desk. The charges were all there, a digital breadcrumb trail of his betrayal. A dinner at Per Se, a suite at the Carlyle, a ridiculously expensive bouquet from a bespoke florist in the West Village, delivered not to their home, but to an address in Chelsea she didn't recognize. The humiliation was a slow burn, a poison administered in tiny daily doses. Julian, for his part, was a portrait of oblivious innocence. When Flora, her hands trembling, finally confronted him with a printout of one of Amber's posts, a shot of her feet in the sand, with the distinctive blue and white striped towels of the Coral Beach Club in the Hamptons, their exclusive members-only club, he'd scoffed. "Flora, darling, you can't be serious," he'd said, taking off his glasses and rubbing his eyes in a performance of weary exasperation. This woman, whoever she is, was at the same beach club. It's a popular place. You're connecting dots that aren't there. Are you feeling all right? You seem stressed. He was gaslighting her masterfully, turning her valid suspicions into a question of her own sanity. It was so effective that for a moment she almost believed him. Was she going crazy? Was this the price of a life of such immense privilege, a creeping madness born of boredom and insecurity? But then the knockout blow. It was the week of the prestigious Vanguard Gala at the Met, the pinnacle of New York's social calendar. Flora had spent weeks working with a designer on a custom Oscar de la Renta gown. It was a stunning creation of midnight blue silk. 2 nights before the gala, Amber posted an Instagram story. It was a short video, no sound of her twirling in a dressing room. She was wearing the exact same gown, the same deep blue, the same elegant cut. The caption was a single devastating word: mine. Flora felt as though she had been physically struck. There was only one way Amber could have gotten that dress. Julian. He must have seen the sketches, heard her talk about it, and then, in an act of breathtaking cruelty, arranged for his mistress to have it too. It was a power play of the highest order, a way of telling her, "You are not special. You are replaceable." Flora called the designer in a panic, cancelling the dress and inventing a story about a sudden illness. She wore a vintage Chanel gown from her closet to the gala instead. Standing beside Julian on the red carpet, smiling for the cameras, she felt like a ghost. He squeezed her hand, whispering, "You look beautiful, darling. Timeless." The irony was a physical pain. Inside, she saw a well-known society blogger, Constance Wu, tapping away on her phone. A few minutes later, a post went up on Constance's widely read blog, The Gilded Lily. The headline, "Vance versus Vance, a tale of 2 dresses." The post detailed how Amber Lynn, a rising lifestyle influencer, had been seen in the same Oscar de la Renta that Flora Vance was rumored to be wearing, and speculated on the delicious social drama. The humiliation was no longer private. It was now public gossip. It was during this maelstrom of shame and confusion that Flora discovered something else, a secret she had been keeping, even from herself. She had been feeling off for weeks, a subtle exhaustion, a metallic taste in her mouth. She had attributed it to stress. But after missing her period for the 2nd month in a row, she bought a pregnancy test on the way home from a tense lunch with a friend. In the cavernous marble bathroom where she had first confronted her husband's lies, she watched as 2 pink lines appeared on the plastic stick. Pregnant. A wave of emotions washed over her, not joy or fear, but a profound and chilling clarity. She was pregnant with the child of a man who was actively, cruelly, and publicly humiliating her. A man who was trying to dismantle her identity piece by piece. This child, this tiny, innocent life growing inside her, was now tethered to this catastrophe. That night, she decided to tell Julian. She needed to see his reaction. She found him in his study, backlit by the city lights, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Julian," she said, her voice steady, "I have something to tell you. I'm pregnant." He turned, his expression unreadable. For a moment, she saw a flicker of something. Was it shock? Fear. He put his glass down and walked toward her. He placed a hand on her stomach, his touch cold. Well, he said, his voice devoid of warmth. That's unexpected. He looked at her, and his eyes were not those of a joyful father-to-be, but of a strategist assessing a new, complicated variable on a chessboard. We'll have to be very careful, won't we? There was no congratulations, no "I love you," just a cold, calculating assessment. That was when Flora knew she wasn't just in a fight for her marriage or her dignity anymore. She was in a fight for her child's future and for her own soul. The mistress thought she was winning the battle for Julian, but Flora was about to change the entire war. The pregnancy did not, as Flora had naively hoped, bring a halt to Julian's affair or Amber's public taunts. Instead, it escalated things. It was as if the news of a baby, a symbol of Flora and Julian's legitimate recognized union, was a declaration of war to Amber. She ramped up her campaign, becoming more brazen, more personal. She started posting about new beginnings and building a future. She shared cryptic quotes about soulmates and finding your person, no matter the obstacles. To the uninformed observer, it was generic influencer fare. To Flora, it was a knife being twisted. The breaking point came on a crisp Saturday in October. Flora was 6 months pregnant, the gentle curve of her stomach now a prominent, undeniable sphere. She had felt a rare surge of energy and decided to visit a small, independent bookstore in Greenwich Village that she loved, a sanctuary of quiet and the smell of old paper. As she was browse the art history section, she heard a familiar saccharine laugh. Her blood turned to ice. She peered through a gap in the bookshelves. There, in the center of the store, was Amber Lynn, and she was not alone. She was with Julian. They weren't being discreet. Julian was laughing, his arm draped casually around Amber's shoulders as she pointed to a book. They looked like any other couple enjoying a weekend in the city. Seeing them together in the flesh in one of her sacred spaces was a violation far worse than any Instagram post. It shattered the final wall of denial Flora had built around herself. This wasn't a digital ghost. It was real. Her husband, the father of her unborn child, was building a life with this woman in broad daylight. Flora ducked behind a shelf, her heart hammering against her ribs. She couldn't breathe. She fled the store, stumbling out onto the sidewalk, gasping for air. The city suddenly felt hostile, every smiling couple a personal affront. She hailed a cab in a daze and went not to the Soho brownstone, which no longer felt like home, but to the one place she knew she would be safe, her best friend Chloe's apartment. Chloe Sterling was a formidable literary agent, a woman with a razor-sharp mind and zero tolerance for nonsense. She opened the door to find Flora, pale and shaking, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, honey," Chloe said, pulling her into a fierce hug. "Come in. Tell me everything." Amidst sobs that racked her entire body, Flora poured it all out, the Instagram posts, the gaslighting, the Oscar de la Renta dress, and finally the scene at the bookstore. Chloe listened, her expression growing harder with each word. She refilled Flora's tea, her movements brisk and purposeful. When Flora was finished, her voice a raw whisper. Chloe sat back, her dark eyes flashing. "That absolute bastard," she said, her voice low and furious. "And her, a parasite in Prada." "Okay. So the marriage is over. That's a given. We'll get you the best divorce lawyer in the state. We'll gut him. But that's the logistics. That's the boring part. What about you, Elle? What about your soul?" "I don't know," Flora whispered, cradling her baby bump. I feel erased. Like I'm just this footnote in his life, the pathetic pregnant wife. She's out there living this vibrant life with my husband, and she's winning. She's making sure everyone knows it. And I'm just waiting. Chloe leaned forward, her gaze intense. Then you stop waiting. You stop letting them write your story. Flora, what have you been doing for the last 6 months aside from surviving this nightmare? Nothing. Just taking notes. What do you mean, taking notes? Flora hesitated. In my journal, every time something happened, every post, every lie he told, I wrote it down. Not just what happened, but how it felt. The specific humiliation of it. The way the light hit the whiskey glass in her photo. The exact wording of his texts. It was the only thing I could control. A slow smile spread across Chloe's face. It was the smile of an agent who has just found her next bestseller. Flora, she said, her voice electric. Don't you see? You've been doing the work already. You're a writer. You have a PhD in art history, for God's sake. You're one of the most brilliant analysts of culture I know. This is not just a diary. This is material. Flora stared at her. Material for what? For a book, you beautiful idiot, Chloe exclaimed, her energy filling the room. Don't get mad. Don't get even. Get published. You think Amber is winning because she's controlling the public narrative with her vapid little photos. You can build a narrative that will swallow hers whole. You don't write a trashy tell-all revenge book. No. You write a memoir, a cultural critique, an examination of modern marriage infidelity and the unique cruelty of social media. You write about the gilded cage. You write about being a ghost in your own life. You write your way out of this. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating. It was a lifeline thrown into the churning waters of her despair. To take all the pain, the shame, the silent screams, and forge them into something powerful, something permanent. I don't know if I can. Flora said the words tasting of doubt. Yes, you can. Chloe insisted, her belief in her friend unwavering. You've been writing it all along. Now you just have to give it a voice. This is how you win Elle. Not by fighting for him. He's a lost cause. You win by reclaiming yourself. You write a story so powerful and so true that it becomes the story, the only one that matters. Flora looked down at her hands, then at the swell of her stomach. A new life was growing inside her. Maybe, just maybe, another one could be born from the ashes of her old one. The tears had stopped. In their place, a tiny, fragile spark of an idea began to glow. Amber Lynn and Julian Vance thought they were breaking her. They had no idea they were creating a writer. The weeks that followed were a blur of creation, a frantic and cathartic exorcism. Flora moved out of the Soho brownstone and into a light-filled apartment Chloe had found for her, overlooking Central Park. Julian had barely protested his relief at avoiding daily confrontation palpable. He provided a generous allowance, conscience money, Chloe called it, and seemed content to let Flora retreat into the shadows. He had no idea she wasn't retreating. She was regrouping. Her apartment became her forge. The dining table was covered not with fine china, but with her laptop legal pads filled with frantic scrawls and stacks of books, not on art, but on sociology, psychology, and feminist theory. She wrote with a fury she hadn't known she possessed. The project became her anchor in the stormy sea of her third trimester and the impending divorce proceedings. Every morning, she would wake up, meditate for 10 minutes, focusing on the baby, and then she would write. She didn't write chronologically. She wrote in bursts of memory and emotion. She wrote about the early days with Julian, the intoxicating whirlwind of their courtship, the brilliant, charismatic man who had swept her off her feet. She wrote about it with a brutal, aching honesty, acknowledging the love that had been there, which made the betrayal all the more profound. She detailed the red flags she had so willingly painted green, his casual possessiveness, his need to be the center of every room, his subtle dismissal of her own career ambitions as a cute hobby. She gave this section a title, The Architect and the Ornament. Then she wrote about Amber Lynn, but she was careful not to make her a two-dimensional villain. Instead, she analyzed her as a cultural phenomenon. She wrote about the performative victory of the modern mistress, the woman who uses social media not just to document her life, but to wage a psychological war. She dissected Amber's posts with the precision of an art historian, analyzing a canvas, pointing out the semiotics of every luxury brand, every suggestive caption, every stolen moment put on public display. She called this chapter The Spectre on the Feed. Her writing was raw and visceral, but it was also intelligent. This was not a diary entry. It was a thesis on her own destruction. She connected her personal experience to a broader cultural malaise, the commodification of relationships, the pressure on women to be perfect wives and mothers, the way wealth can be a cage, and the unique loneliness of being betrayed in a hyper-connected world. Chloe acted as her first reader and ruthless editor. She'd scrawl notes in the margins. More here. How did this feel in your body? Or, this is brilliant. Connect it to the myth of Pygmalion, or cut this. Too self-pitying. Be the analyst, not the victim. One evening, Chloe brought over a bottle of non-alcoholic champagne and a contract. I showed the first 3 chapters and an outline to Diana Blackwood at Sterling Press. She said, her eyes shining. Flora's jaw dropped. Diana Blackwood was a legend in the publishing world, known for championing bold, genre-defining female writers. She didn't just like it, Elle. She called it the silent scream of the modern woman made manifest. She said it's not a memoir. It's a cultural document. They're offering a significant advance, enough to make you financially independent from Julian before the divorce is even settled. Flora looked at the contract, her name printed in bold black ink. Flora Vance. Not Mrs. Julian Vance. Just her. It was the first time in years she had felt a true sense of her own power. She signed the contract, her hand steady. As her due date approached, the writing became more urgent. She wrote through the Braxton Hicks contractions, through the swollen ankles and the sleepless nights. The baby would kick inside her, a constant reminder of what she was fighting for. She was not just writing a book. She was building a fortress for herself and her child, a fortress made of words. The title came to her one night as she looked out over the glittering expanse of Central Park. People looked at her old life and saw a fairy tale. They didn't see the bars. Chloe had called it the Gilded Cage, but Flora wanted something more personal. She wanted to capture the hollowness, the way her own life had been stolen and replaced by a cheap imitation. The book would be called The Echo of Us. 2 weeks before her daughter was born, Flora emailed the final manuscript to Diana Blackwood. It was done. She had taken the ugliest, most painful experience of her life and transformed it into 300 pages of searing, elegant prose. The day she went into labor, Julian was predictably out of the country. He answered her call on the second ring. Flora. Is everything okay? I'm in labor. Julian, she said, her voice calm between contractions. There was that familiar pause. Right. Okay. I'll get my assistant to change my flight. I'll try to be there as soon as I can. Don't bother, Flora said, and the strength in her own voice surprised her. Chloe is here. I'm not alone. She hung up before he could reply. Hours later, she held her daughter in her arms. A beautiful, perfect baby girl with a full head of dark hair. She looked at this new life, a life she had created, and felt a wave of love so fierce it erased everything else. She named her Hope. Holding her daughter, Flora knew the battle was over. The war, however, was about to begin. Her book was scheduled for publication in 6 months. Amber Lynn was still posting about her charmed life, completely oblivious. Julian was still running his empire, convinced he had successfully managed a difficult situation. They had no idea of the storm that was about to break. They had heard the echo, but they were about to be consumed by the sound. The 6 months between Hope's birth and the publication of The Echo of Us were a period of deceptive calm. Flora dedicated herself to her daughter, finding a deep, quiet joy in the rhythms of motherhood. She rarely went online. She didn't need to check Amber's feed anymore. She was no longer a spectator to her own life. Julian played the part of the concerned, if distant, father. He visited Hope twice a week, cooing over the bassinet for 15 minutes before taking a work call on the terrace. He and Flora were civil, their conversations limited to the baby's schedule and the logistics of the divorce, which was proceeding slowly. He saw Flora as a problem that had been contained. The mother of his child, soon to be his ex-wife, living quietly on his dime. Amber, meanwhile, was at the zenith of her winning streak. She was now a fixture in the gossip columns, often photographed at events on Julian's arm. The narrative was clear. Julian Vance had traded in his older, staid wife for a younger, more vibrant model. Amber's influencer career had exploded. She now had over 1 million followers and lucrative sponsorship deals with champagne brands and luxury resorts. Her posts were more arrogant than ever, filled with hashtags like #unapologetic and #livingmytruth. Neither of them knew what was coming. Diana Blackwood and her team at Sterling Press had planned the book launch like a military campaign. There were no advance copies sent to salacious tabloids. Instead, they targeted serious journalistic outlets. Excerpts ran in the New York Times Magazine and The Atlantic. Flora gave one and only one pre-publication interview to a respected female journalist known for her incisive cultural commentary. The interview aired the Sunday before the book's release. Flora was luminous. She was not a victim seeking pity. She was an academic, an author presenting her thesis. She spoke not of my husband or his mistress, but of the archetypes of the powerful man and the performative other woman. She framed her story as a case study in modern betrayal. The effect was electric. The internet, which had once been Amber's weapon, was now being turned against her. The Echo of Us was released on a Tuesday. By noon, it was the #1 best-selling book on Amazon. By the end of the day, the first print run had sold out. The reaction was something no one, not even Chloe or Diana, had anticipated. The book wasn't just a bestseller. It was a phenomenon. It started with women. Women who had been cheated on, gaslit, and made to feel small. They saw their own stories in Flora's elegant prose. But it quickly spread beyond that. It resonated with anyone who had ever felt erased, overlooked, or had their narrative stolen by someone more powerful. A hashtag started trending on Twitter, #MyEcho. It was followed by an avalanche of personal stories. At My Echo was when my boss presented my project as his own in a board meeting, and I was expected to smile and nod. At My Echo was when my husband's family blamed me for our infertility, and he stayed silent. At My Echo was seeing my ex-boyfriend on a date at our special place with a new girl a week after he told me he needed space. The book gave a name and a language to a universal feeling of being rendered invisible. Flora Vance hadn't just written a memoir, she had written a manifesto. The initial reaction from Julian and Amber was dismissive. Julian, cornered by a reporter from the Wall Street Journal outside his office, gave a curt statement. "This is a private family matter. It's a sad and unfortunate fictionalization of events written during a difficult time. My only concern is for my daughter." Amber tried to play it cool. She went on Instagram Live from a poolside cabana in Miami. "I'm getting a lot of questions about a certain book," she said with a flick of her hair, her smile brittle. "I don't comment on fiction. I'm too busy living an authentic life to be bothered with negativity and lies. Haters gonna hate." Unbothered. But the tide of public opinion was a tsunami, and they were standing on the beach. Her comment section, once a shrine to her beauty and lifestyle, became a war zone. For every "you go girl," there were now 1,000 comments quoting passages from Flora's book. "The spectre on the feed, that's you." "Enjoying the view from Flora's honeymoon suite, see Chapter 4. Unbothered. Your entire existence is a comment on someone else's life. You're the echo." Her sponsors got nervous. The champagne brand quietly pulled their ads. The luxury resort in the Maldives postponed their collaboration. The carefully constructed brand of Amberlin Luxe was becoming toxic. For Flora, the experience was surreal. She watched the movement unfold from the quiet of her apartment, with hope sleeping in her arms. She had expected to be heard, but she had never expected to become a voice for so many. The book was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt like an echo, and its sound was growing louder every day, a roar of recognition that was about to bring an empire to its knees. What began as a hashtag evolved into a global movement. The Echo of Us was fast-tracked for international publication, topping bestseller lists in the UK, Australia, France, and Germany. The phrase, "to be an echo," entered the cultural lexicon, a shorthand for having your story co-opted or your presence erased. University sociology departments added the book to their reading lists. Talk of a film adaptation, produced by a major female-led studio, began to circulate. Flora Vance was no longer the wronged wife of a tech millionaire. She was a global feminist icon. This wave of public opinion, which had started by eroding Amber Lynn's social standing, now began to crash against the foundations of Julian's empire, Ethereum Dynamics. Ethereum was a publicly traded company. Its success was built not just on its technology, but on Julian Vance's reputation as a stable, forward-thinking genius. Flora's book, with its calm, analytical dissection of his character, his duplicity, his narcissism, his transactional view of human relationships, painted a very different picture. It suggested that the man steering the ship was fundamentally untrustworthy. The trouble started with a column in Forbes, written by a respected female business analyst. The headline was stark. "The Vance Problem. Can we trust a CEO who treats his family like a hostile takeover?" The article didn't focus on the salacious details of the affair. Instead, it raised pointed questions about corporate governance. If Julian Vance was capable of such intricate, long-term deception in his personal life, what did that say about his professional integrity? Could shareholders trust the word of a man who was, according to a best-selling, critically acclaimed book, a pathological liar? The article was a bombshell. Ethereum's stock, which had been a darling of the market, dipped by 5% overnight, then 8%, then 12%. The board of directors, who had once celebrated Julian's aggressive style, grew deeply concerned. They were fielding calls from major institutional investors. The company's annual Women in Tech conference was facing a boycott from key speakers. The PR nightmare was spiraling into a genuine financial crisis. Julian, trapped in the crossfire, became increasingly volatile. He tried to fight back, issuing a legal threat against Sterling Press for defamation, a move that only made him look more like the villain of Flora's book. He held an all-hands meeting at Ethereum to reassure his employees. But his rambling defensive speech only fueled the internal gossip and anxiety. The reckoning for Amber was swifter and more brutal. The public had cast her as the villain in a story they were all reading, and they showed no mercy. She was hounded by paparazzi. Every restaurant she went to, she was met with whispers and pointed fingers. Her attempts to post new content were met with a tidal wave of ridicule. She posted a photo of a green smoothie with the caption, "Self-care," and the top comment was, "Is that the same shade of green as the envy you felt for a pregnant woman's life?" Her career was over. Her 1,000,000 followers began to vanish. She became a pariah. Desperate, she tried to do a tell-all interview of her own to clear her name, but it backfired spectacularly. Under the gentle but firm questioning of the interviewer, her rehearsed lines about love and a deep connection sounded hollow and self-serving. She came across not as a romantic heroine, but as a deeply calculating and insecure woman who had made a catastrophic miscalculation. She thought she was competing with Flora for Julian. She didn't realize she was competing with a masterpiece of literature. The final devastating twist for Amber came not from the public, but from Julian. As his own world crumbled, his affection for her curdled into resentment. He saw her now not as a prize, but as the source of his downfall. Their arguments became explosive. In a moment of sheer panic and cruelty, he cut her off financially. The Chelsea apartment, the designer clothes, the lavish lifestyle, it all disappeared overnight. He had acquired her, used her, and now, as his asset turned into a liability, he discarded her. Amber Lynn, who had gloated about winning, had lost everything. She retreated from public life entirely. Her Lux Instagram account, a digital graveyard of a life that no longer existed. Meanwhile, the pressure on Julian reached its breaking point. Marcus Thorne, a long-serving and highly respected member of the Ethereum board, called an emergency meeting. "Julian," Marcus said, his voice grave in a boardroom that felt like a courtroom. "This isn't about your personal life anymore. This is about the fiduciary duty we have to our shareholders. The brand is toxic because you are toxic. The market has lost faith, not in our technology, but in you. The board has held a vote. We are asking for your resignation as CEO, effective immediately." Julian stared at the faces around, the table faces of people he had made rich, people he considered his allies. He saw no support, only cold, hard business. His kingdom, the empire he had built, had turned on him. The architect was being evicted from his own creation. He had lost his wife, his mistress, and now his company. All because he had underestimated the quiet, thoughtful woman he had tried so hard to erase. Flora Vance hadn't just written a book. She had authored his complete and utter ruin. The news of Julian Vance's resignation from Ethereum Dynamics hit the financial world like an earthquake. It wasn't a quiet departure. It was a public execution. The Wall Street Journal ran a front-page story under the headline, "The Echo That Roared: How a CEO's Hubris and a Tell-All Memoir Toppled a Tech Giant." Bloomberg dedicated a special segment to analyzing the Vance effect, a new cautionary tale for boards about the tangible billion-dollar cost of a leader's moral failings. The more salacious New York Post was less analytical, plastering Julian's face on its cover with the simple, brutal word, toast. His fall from grace was absolute. The allies who had once flocked to his side, eager to be seen with the Midas touch visionary, now treated him like a contagion. His phone, once a relentless torrent of calls from investors, protégés, and power brokers, fell silent. His social circle evaporated overnight, proving that their loyalty had been to his position, not to the man. Julian, who had always commanded the center of every room, found himself utterly alone in a world that no longer revered him. This new power dynamic was starkly evident in the final divorce proceedings. The meeting took place not in a grand corporate boardroom, but in a sterile, neutral-toned lawyer's office. Julian arrived alone, his usual custom-tailored suit looking a size too big, his air of invincibility replaced by a pallor of exhaustion. Across the table sat Flora, poised and calm, flanked by her formidable divorce attorney, and Chloe, who was present as a supportive friend, and the agent who had set this all in motion. Julian's legal counsel, a man he'd hired privately, was hopelessly outmatched. Without the backing of Ethereum's corporate legal team, he was just a man in a room stripped of his leverage. Flora's lawyer systematically laid out the terms which were non-negotiable. There was no argument, no blustering from Julian. He simply sat his gaze fixed on the mahogany grain of the table and signed away the assets, the properties, and the last vestiges of their shared life. When he slid the signed papers across the table, his hand trembled slightly. He didn't look at Flora. He couldn't. While Julian's world shrank to the confines of a lonely high-rise apartment with panoramic views of a city that no longer felt like his, Flora's world began to expand. She immediately put the Soho brownstone on the market, wanting to shed the last skin of her old life. The sale was finalized in a week, fetching a price that made headlines of its own. But the money was secondary. The real prize was the freedom. She took hope and moved upstate, embarking on a deliberate and joyful search for a true home. She didn't want a mansion or an estate. She wanted a place with character, with history, with soul. She found it in a rambling 19th-century farmhouse with painted shutters, wide plank floors that creaked with stories, and a sprawling wild garden that backed onto a quiet wood. The house needed work, but Flora embraced the process. She wasn't curating a space for a magazine feature. She was building a sanctuary for herself and her daughter. She chose warm, comfortable furniture, filled the walls with art from emerging female artists, and designated the sunniest room overlooking the garden as her writing studio. Simultaneously, she threw her formidable intellect and newfound resources into creating the Echo Foundation. It was not a vanity project. She consulted with top non-profit advisors and legal experts, drafting a charter to provide grants, mentorship programs, and legal assistance to women who were fighting to tell their own stories, whether in art, literature, or the corporate world. It was the ultimate act of turning her pain into a systemic solution, ensuring other women wouldn't have to fight their battles alone. About a year after the publication of her book, Julian came for one of his bi-monthly visits with Hope. The change in him was profound. He drove a modest rental car, not a Maybach. He looked older, the sharp edges of his ambition sanded down into a weary resignation. He found Flora in the garden planting bulbs for the spring, her hands covered in soil. Hope now, a chattering toddler, was happily digging beside her with a small red shovel. "Flora," he said, his voice hesitant. She looked up, shielding her eyes from the autumn sun. "Julian, you're early." "I wanted to— Can we talk? Without lawyers?" he asked, gesturing vaguely toward the house. Flora studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. She instructed the nanny to take Hope to the nearby playground and led Julian into the warm, light-filled kitchen. She poured him a glass of water, her movements unhurried. He stood awkwardly in the center of the room, looking like a ghost from another world amidst the lived-in comfort of her new life. I read the book," he finally stammered, as if the words themselves were a physical effort. "All of it. Twice. I didn't understand before. I saw it all as a game, a series of moves. I didn't see the carnage. What I did to you." He took a shaky breath. "I was a monster, Elle. There's no other word for it. I was arrogant and cruel, and I broke everything that mattered. I am so sorry." The apology, when it came, felt genuine, born of a long, lonely year of reflection. "I know you are, Julian," she said, her voice even. There was no triumph in it, only a quiet acknowledgement of fact. A flicker of desperate hope ignited in his eyes. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he pressed on, stepping closer. "About what's important. It's not the money or the company. It's family. It's hope. I was wondering if maybe someday you could find a way to forgive me. If we could try. Not for us, not like before. But for her. To be a real family." Flora listened patiently until he was finished. She didn't flinch or look away. She simply absorbed his words, then gave him the gift of a final, clarifying truth. "The person you're apologizing to, Julian, doesn't exist anymore," she said softly. "You didn't just break her, you erased her. And from that empty space, I had to build someone new. This person," she gestured to herself, to the house, to the life outside the window, "is not the other half of you. She is whole, all by herself." She continued, her voice gaining a firm, instructional tone. "Your apology is for you. It's so you can sleep at night. My forgiveness is my own, and it has nothing to do with you. I forgave the situation long ago because I had to move forward. But rebuilding a family on a foundation of lies and betrayal, that isn't a family. It's a prison. And I've already escaped one gilded cage. I have no intention of building another." She walked to the front door and opened it. The crisp autumn air filled the space between them. "You are Hope's father. You will always have a place in her life. I will make sure of that. But you do not have a place in mine. Our story is finished. It is time for you to start writing a new one. For yourself." He stared at her, the last of his hope extinguishing. He saw not a hint of hatred or anger, but a vast, calm sea of indifference. He had become finally irrelevant. He nodded wordlessly and walked out. Flora closed the door and leaned against it, taking a deep, cleansing breath. She didn't watch him leave. She walked back through her quiet, sunlit house to her studio. The manuscript for her next novel lay waiting. Outside, she could hear the distant, joyful sound of her daughter's laughter carrying on the wind. It was the only validation she had ever truly needed. She sat down, picked up her pen, and in the profound peace of the world she had built for herself, she began to write. That is the incredible story of Flora Vance, a woman who refused to be erased. It's a powerful reminder that the narrative you own is the most powerful one of all. She endured a private hell and a public humiliation, but instead of breaking, she created. She transformed her pain into a movement, proving that true victory isn't about revenge, but about reclamation. Her story shows us that a single voice, armed with truth and courage, can be more powerful than any fortune or empire. If this story of resilience and empowerment moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more unforgettable stories of justice, strength, and the incredible power of the human spirit. What part of Flora's journey resonated most with you? Let us know in the comments below.